Welcome to San Mateo County Today. Conversations with government leaders throughout San Mateo County. Here's your host, Marshall Wilson.
The city of Belmont is centrally located in San Mateo County, and it's front and center on San Mateo County Today. We're joined by Doug Kim, the Vice Mayor of Belmont, and then Charles Stone, the Mayor of Belmont. We're going to hear about infrastructure improvements, long-term planning, ideas of raising the minimum wage, and why cities such as Belmont are really at front and center of issues such as climate change. Welcome to San Mateo County Today. I'm your host, Marshall Wilson, and I'm happy today to be joined by Doug Kim, the Vice Mayor of the city of Belmont. Doug, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Marshall.
So this is your second, well, you were elected to the city council in 2015, so really 2 full years on the city council. Why did you want to get involved in local politics in Belmont in the first place? Let's start there.
You bet. I've built a career over 30 years in public policy, helping local and regional governments tackle the challenges of today. And what I saw in Belmont was a city smack dab in the middle of a changing peninsula that was changing in ways that none of us could have predicted. And I thought that now would be a good time for someone maybe with my background to give my 2 cents and help the city move more progressively towards getting in front of some of these challenges and trying to better define its future. So when you work as an urban planner, working in public office is sort of a natural transition.
And speaking of planning, I know one of the big issues in Belmont right now is the general plan. Tell us about that. And as a professional planner, I'm sure you have some insights into that.
You bet. Every city, as you know, has to update its general plan, its vision for the future. And in Belmont, we hadn't updated that for 35 years. So,
well, nothing's changed.
That's right. I think the problem, of course, is that so much has changed, right? Mm-hmm. And even a general plan 10 years ago would have failed to would have missed some of the changes that we're already seeing. So it's hard to predict the future. But you know how the saying goes, if you don't have a plan, then the world will change your city for you. And I think I'm thrilled to be on the council because we are holistically saying it is time to refresh our vision of the future. So we've got a half dozen plans that answer the question, what is Belmont going to be tomorrow? And I think the benefit of doing them all together, even though it's a lot of work, is that you create real consistency, vertically and horizontally. Those are buzzwords, but basically you make sure that your vision works from top to bottom. And I think we're hopefully over the next few months going to be pulling that together and explaining how we think we can control where Belmont goes in the future.
Well, and a lot of the peninsula now, to use your words here, is going vertical. We're seeing a lot more high rises and a lot more density. Are we going to be seeing that in Belmont as well? Or what is that sort of overall global vision for Belmont? I think in your mind.
Right. I think it's important that we recognize that we have to come up with solutions that are context specific. So we are not Redwood City. We are not a lot of other cities on the peninsula. And so having density, having different types of land uses makes sense if the infrastructure is there to handle it and if we can protect the quality of life in our communities. And so, sure, when you look at the foothills, those are single-family neighborhoods. Those aren't changing. But we have opportunities along El Camino Real. We have opportunities between the freeway and El Camino. And we're going to look at finding the sweet spot where we promote certain kinds of development. A big theme for us is going to be diversifying and trying to build more economic development so that we can better pay for the kinds of things that are important to us.
Well, and I think it's important to note too, when you talk about infrastructure, for years, Belmont has not had a huge dynamic economic base. Great bedroom community, but not a lot of industry to generate that tax revenue that's needed. But you have now Measure I in Belmont. Tell us about what is Measure I and how is that going to really move Belmont forward?
Right. Measure I is the answer to the question, what kinds of things should cities do to take care of their aging infrastructure? So, 40 years ago, when we had Prop 13, many cities lost a revenue stream that would help them keep the lights on and fill potholes. And so from that time forward, you had progressive cities finding ways to diversify their revenue stream, whether it be economic development. Belmont didn't do as much of that. I think we were a little more passive. And over the years, what we found, of course, is that just like the roof on your house, if you don't maintain it, those things don't get better and they get more expensive. And so it's well known that we let our citizens know that over the last 10 years, our infrastructure and the quality of our streets had dropped over 30% just in 20 years. Whereas you can look at our neighboring cities of San Mateo, Burlingame, the quality of their roads actually improved 20 to 30%. I have a friend who lives on the border of Belmont and San Mateo. And to get to his house, I have to drive into San Mateo. It's a funny street. You can literally see where the city line is because the street starts to fall apart. And we joke about it all the time, but when you're in government, those aren't jokes. And so
it's not funny anymore.
It is not funny. And so Measure I was our attempt to say, how can we as citizens get control over this and have a modest sales tax increase that would help to fund these kinds of needed improvements. So infrastructure is a big priority for us, whether it's the quality of our roads or our storm drains or other things that really people expect the government will take care of.
Well, and Belmont has always been known, again, as a bedroom community. And there's lots of talk in Belmont now about placemaking, which is something I'm not really familiar with, but I've heard that, talk about Belmont placemaking. Tell us, what is Belmont doing about, quote, placemaking, and what is that?
Yeah, placemaking is certainly one of those $3 buzzwords. Belmont is a city that I think prides itself on being a great hometown with a lot of natural beauty. Placemaking simply says you can have that, but maybe create more of an identity. If I ask you to explain to your friends what's Belmont about, you might be hard pressed to figure out what iconic symbol or what landmark represents a Belmont. Placemaking says, look, there are lots of ways to create an identity, whether it's creating a unified sign program that welcomes you to Belmont and points you to some of the highlights of our city, whether it's creating an iconic downtown where you go, you know what, let's go to Belmont. They have that really cool downtown where you've got a walk street and you've got some interesting things happening there. We want to create an identity that reminds people that Belmont has a personality and creates a destination that you want to bring your family to on a Friday night.
And that has always been one thing. Belmont has never had that unified downtown. There's a few different places that might qualify as sort of a quasi-downtown. Are you actually trying to create that central gathering place for people in Belmont?
Absolutely. The problem, of course, and it's not a problem, but since we don't have central command, we can't just wave a magic wand and make all this happen. But what we can do is paint a picture of the vision we see for our downtown. And our downtown, as you know, is more than where you see the Safeway. It is really the four corners of the intersection of Ralston and El Camino, where you've got a Caltrain station, you've got opportunities. It doesn't quite feel like a downtown that, again, you want to go to necessarily. So we want to let the development community know that we are open for business, and if you're willing to consider redeveloping your properties in our vision, we'd like to try to make something work. And the belief is that we're going to see over time, 5, 10, 15 years, the actual delivery of a downtown that all of our residents say, we've been talking about for so long, why don't you deliver? And we're working on trying to set the stage for that.
Sometimes I think that like 5, 10, 15 years out is a really long-term planning. And now that I have a child, I start to think sometimes like 5, 10 years, I'm thinking about what it's going to be like for her. And I know you have 2 children who both go to school in Belmont. And being a planner, how does that whole mindset really affect you? And when people say like, oh, I don't want to wait for 5 years, but say, no, this is a process that's going to occur. How does having that family really set that long-term vision? Does that affect the way you think?
It absolutely does. And I think other members of the council share this opinion. When you've got a family, you tend to think more about short-term improvements, right? So that's why we, like other cities, are looking at how to make the most of our parks resources, right? How to create more educational opportunities after school, for example, for our kids. Those are things that don't take an act of Congress to do. And so we think a lot about those short-term kinds of programs. A lot of what we think about in creating a new downtown is more long-term, right? And so when you look at our priorities, it's a balance of the short-term things that often involve parks and recreation, but are doable, and the long-term things. And what we would like to see when it comes to our general plan is some short-term wins that show my kids and your kids that this is just a taste of the Belmont that's coming. We all joke about the faded signs that show our residents what the Belmont of tomorrow can look like. They've been up there for so long that people have grown to sort of be cynical about this. I think we on the council say that we need to have a game plan, but we also need to try to get some early wins to show that change is possible.
And we don't have a lot of time left, so this is kind of a tough question to sum it up on. But in that long-term vision and having children, affordability is a big issue on the peninsula, and it's a huge issue, I know, in the Belmont area. What are some steps Belmont can take to improve affordability, both in the short term and in the long term for housing?
Right. Our tools are the same that most cities have. Number one is do what we can to improve the diversity and stock of our housing. We've got some publicly owned lands that the city owns, and we are actively working with the development community to try to get in some very tasteful but affordable housing into those projects. And so that's what we can control. I think folks don't realize how expensive it is to build housing, and so we're doing the best we can under the current economic circumstances to do just that. Secondly, we can look to the private sector and say, we are open for business, but if you want to build in our city, you have an obligation to include some affordable housing and give back to the community. Another thing that cities can do is to help those nonprofits and other NGOs out there that are trying to provide low income or sometimes no income interest loans to young families to get their starter homes, to provide rental assistance. So again, it's a blend of long-term solutions and short-term programs that often involve partnerships. And I think we are looking to the community to try to find those natural partnerships to get people help now.
Well, great. Doug Kim, Vice Mayor of Belmont, it's been great having you on San Mateo County today. And join us back here in our next segment. We're going to hear from the Mayor of Belmont, Charles Stone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to San Mateo County today. Thanks for joining us. I am now here with the Mayor of Belmont, Charles Stone. Charles, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Marshall.
So we just heard from Doug Kim, the Vice Mayor, about some of those nuts and bolts issues about infrastructure, long-term planning in Belmont. I want to talk with you a little bit more about that, but also some bigger policy issues that are going on in Belmont. I know there's a big push about the minimum wage. So tell us what's going on in the minimum wage in Belmont right now.
Sure. Back in February, we had our annual priority setting session, and one of the things we talked about as a council was whether or not we wanted to explore having a minimum wage ordinance that raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour faster than the state of California, which gets you there by 2022 or 2023, depending on how big your company is. And the council, a majority of the council wanted to pursue that and at least explore it. We've had a very busy year with a lot of interesting and exciting things happening, but we're finally getting around to moving forward with that. We've had a study session recently, got some information, we've done some outreach, and a majority of the council has expressed an interest in examining different scenarios for how we might do that.
Well, what kind of dollars are we talking about here? And have you been getting any pushback from the business community?
You know, Councilmember Hurt and I are the subcommittee that works on this issue, and we've both been trying to do a lot of outreach, especially to the restaurant community. Restaurateurs face a unique situation with their employees in the minimum wage because they have tipped servers who are already making more than the minimum wage with tips, even though they're earning the minimum wage. California is one of a very few states that does not give a credit for those tips, and legally, we can't do that in Belmont. So I really am interested in hearing what they have to say and learning what the dollars and cents look like specifically to them, but I'm confident that we can find a way to do a little bit to help the most vulnerable wage earners amongst us, while at the same time making sure we don't create too much in the way of negative consequences for restaurateurs.
Now, is this something like, why is Belmont, which is not a big power in the Bay Area. I mean, it's a great city, great community, but it's not a big economic force in the Bay Area. Why is Belmont taking this on? Why is that such an important issue here?
Well, firstly, in our school district, we're taught to have the growth mentality, so we always say yet. We're not a powerhouse yet.
Got it.
San Mateo led the way last year. They were trailblazers in San Mateo County in terms of adopting their own minimum wage ordinance. And they get to $15 per hour, I think, in 2019 or 2020. I paid close attention to that. I, for a long time, thought that a regional minimum wage was appropriate, especially in regions like ours where the cost of living is dramatically higher than pretty much anywhere else in the state. And to me, it just doesn't make sense for someone in Bakersfield to have the same minimum wage as someone in Belmont. There's also a real wage inequality and wealth inequality issue in this country that I believe is responsible for a lot of the political things that we've seen and a lot of the negative societal consequences that we're experiencing. So to the extent we can even put a small dent in that, I'm one of 5, but I personally think we should. And it may be unique to San Mateo County in some way, but in Santa Clara County, many cities have already done this. In the East Bay, cities have done this. Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, our regional powerhouses that we aspire to be like maybe someday, they've already done it as well. So I think it's a small step. It's not going to solve anything overnight. It's not a panacea. But in terms of attacking the cost of living issue for those who are the most vulnerable among us, it is a step.
Well, let's turn a bit and go to another issue that affects everybody. One is, of course, income inequality and being able to, the affordability issue. Another is mobility and getting around. And as we all have experienced, just getting around the peninsula is so difficult these days. And Belmont, again, is somewhat unique in this, in that you have that one artery that goes all the way from Interstate 280 all the way down to the Bay, Ralston, which can turn into a parking lot at times. What is Belmont doing to try to solve the mobility issue in Belmont, but also Belmont as part of the larger San Mateo County Bay Area?
So in addition to my role on the council, I'm also the vice chair of the San Mateo County Transit District Board. We run the Samtrans buses, Paratransit, Ready Wheels, and we also manage Caltrain. A little known fact, the agency also owns the Dunbarton Rail Bridge and contributed heavily to the Millbrae-Bart extension. We're really a multimodal transit agency. And while in Belmont we have some unique issues with Ralston, one of the important things to recognize, and I probably don't do enough of it, is to give councils of the past some credit. And San Carlos and Belmont worked together to do their grade separations at Ralston and El Camino, and O'Neill and Harbor and El Camino, and in San Carlos, Hawley and El Camino. I would say that as bad as it is, it could be a heck of a lot worse if we still had those gates coming down every time a train came by.
I remember that era of being stopped there forever, and then the really economic turmoil too when that was done. That was a tough period of time, but Belmont survived.
Yes, they did, and that was really a move that was forward-looking, because towns like San Bruno just did theirs, and they were about $110 million, and I know we got ours for pennies on the dollar of that, and the next town that does them, they're going to be even more than that. So I'm really glad we have that. We have the Ralston Corridor Study, which is a traffic study completed in 2014. We have some really exciting things happening that are in that plan. We're going to have a light at South Road and Ralston. That's being paid for by Crystal Springs Uplands as part of their traffic mitigation. They're also doing some improvements at Davis Drive and Ralston, right up where the school is located. And Belmont Redwood Shore School District, which has been a wonderful partner in recent times, has agreed to pay for the installation of some lights in the area of the entrance to Ralston Middle School, which is real challenging for anyone coming from Redwood Shores or the east part of Belmont, because you have to kind of play Frogger to get through the traffic turning left into Ralston Middle School. Those are the things we're doing locally. At more of a macro level, the San Mateo County Transit District is exploring a number of things, including some Dumbarton rail corridor improvements. And that's not just the bridge, but that's also the approaches to the bridge and a right-of-way that runs through Menlo Park and Redwood City and has the potential to provide some really exciting mobility options with train and bus. Folks would like to see a bike and ped path there too, but unfortunately there may not be enough room for that. We're also taking a look at upping our youth ridership. Samtrans does not run school routes, but we do run some routes that serve young riders getting to and from schools. And that's really important because we all know that morning traffic around school start time can be a real bear, especially on Ralston. So we're working in those ways and others. We're looking at an app that will tell you where the bus is going to be in real time. And someday we'd like to be all the way to the point where you can take out your phone, find out the schedule, the nearest stop, where that bus is right then, when it's going to get to you, and then when you get on the bus, boop, you just use your phone to get on. We know we probably should be there already, and we're trying to get there as fast as we can.
Well, it seems like on many issues, transportation, housing affordability, really, you name it, it takes a lot of that political will to get that done. And part of that, I think, political will comes from the fact that things get so bad, it gets done. I talked with Doug Kim earlier about how time goes by, about advanced planning. And 10 years ago when the recession, I guess 9 years ago, the recession hit, a lot of those pressures to do all those things kind of went away. Traffic wasn't as bad, affordability wasn't as bad. And now we're seeing that pressure building up again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'm sure we will see in the long term. Another issue that you're involved in, or another program, is Peninsula Clean Energy. That's something that's been talked a lot about. I'm not sure that many people really understand what Peninsula Clean Energy is. So tell us a bit about that.
I'd love to, and you're absolutely right. We're trying to get the message out as far and as broad as possible. Peninsula Clean Energy is San Mateo County's energy provider. We have taken over.
I thought it was PG&E.
Well, PG&E still handles the infrastructure,
all right,
and they handle making sure that the power gets to you. We procure energy for San Mateo County now, and we procure cleaner energy for cheaper than PG&E does. One thing that I'm going to jump right into is we have 2 rate packages. One is the default Eco 50 package. That's what everyone is automatically opted into unless you take action to get out of it and go back to PG&E. The other is the Eco 100 rate. That's what I'm on, and I encourage everyone to go to. Cities like Belmont and cities up and down San Mateo County have shown that they are dedicated to the environment. They care passionately about the environment and about climate change. Perhaps the most important thing folks can do is shift to an energy package that's bringing 100% clean energy into their homes. It does cost a little bit more than what you'd be paying to PG&E or our base rate at PCE, but I've been on it for the last 7 months, and I haven't really noticed much of a change at all. And to me, it's well worth that trade-off for a couple bucks a month to do something important for Mother Earth.
Well, and speaking of Mother Earth, we hear a lot, of course, nationally about coal. There's no talk about raising the federal minimum wage, I think, in Washington these days. Housing affordability is not a big issue. It seems to me, this might be kind of a softball question for you, but like on the local level, it seems like city councils are really sort of tackling these issues that we once want to look to Washington to solve. Again, clean energy, for instance.
You're absolutely right. And I think that sadly, in my opinion, that's the way it's going to have to be for a while. For instance, when the president announced that he was going to back out of the Paris Accords, there's a mayor's group nationwide that said, we're committed to making sure that we do everything we need to do that would have happened under the Paris Accords, anything, and Washington can't stop us from doing that. I'm proud that our colleagues in Belmont, my colleagues in Belmont, gave me the authority to sign on to that pledge, and that we're part of that effort. And I think you're going to see more and more of that local self-help approach. We understand here on the peninsula and have shown an understanding as voters and citizens that the world we want costs money and takes effort. We've passed, taxes like Measure I in Belmont to attack roads issue, Measure A and Measure K at a countywide level to help with transportation issues. And I'm sure we're going to see agencies going back out to the public again and asking for more help. And I know everyone's sensitive to being overtaxed and no one likes to pay their taxes. But at a very fundamental level, we need to ask ourselves, what do we want our community to look like, and what are we willing to do to get it there?
On that thought, we'll leave it right there. Charles Stone, Mayor of Belmont, thanks for joining us, and thank you for joining us on San Mateo County Today.